Russia and Europe are moving their troops to their shared borders, Belarus is preparing a military provocation against European NATO countries, and Poland has officially closed the airspace on the border with Belarus and Ukraine for 3 months. At the same time, Lithuanian intelligence reports that Russia is actively deploying a military unit on the border with NATO, which may indicate preparations for a military provocation. Meanwhile, other experts remind us that on the eve of these events, men in Belarus were being called up en masse for emergency military training. And against the backdrop of such news, there are more and more statements that Russia is preparing a new military provocation against Europe, and Europe is ready for it. That's why we might witness an attack by the Russian Federation on Europe in the coming days or weeks. Well, in this episode I suggest we actually break down what was really said in Lithuanian intelligence and why Poland is closing its airspace for 3 months. And what does this phrase, close the airspace for 3 months, actually mean? Is this really all preparation for war, or is the information space just so overheated that such statements lead to conclusions that, for example, a war will soon start in the Suwałki region? Let's calmly sort out this whole situation now. My name is Alexei Pechi. Let's discuss this topic together. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, like this episode, and leave any comment under this video, so that YouTube's algorithms recommend this episode to as many viewers as possible. And please subscribe to my Telegram channel, Peachy News. The link is in the description of this video. There we publish breaking news as it comes in. So, Russia is building up troops on the border with Norway. At the same time, Russia is gaining combat experience in Ukraine and may potentially use it in a conflict with the alliance. This is stated in the annual security threat assessment presented by Lithuanian intelligence, and all of this is reported by Reuters. In the Lithuanian intelligence document, which I want to emphasize again, is called the Annual Security Threat Assessment. It is noted that under certain conditions, Russia could prepare for a large-scale military conflict with NATO in about 6 months. In particular, if the current sanctions are lifted. I'll quote further. Russia will likely create not only an army that is 30 to 50% larger than before the war, but also a relatively modern one. Strategic reserves of weapons and ammunition will be fully restored. Moscow's key goals remain shifting the balance of power in Europe in its favor and achieving complete subjugation of Ukraine. The document also notes the growth of Russian defense industry capabilities. According to Lithuanian intelligence, military production was expanded with the support of China, which allowed Russia to reduce its dependence on Western technologies. After the end of the war, a possible surplus of weapons, as stated in the report, could have consequences for global security. Lithuania, which borders both Russia and its closest ally Belarus, is a member of NATO and the European Union, and it is considered equal, and it is one of the most consistent supporters of Ukraine and critics of Russian policy. The intelligence report also mentions parcel explosions in 2024. Lithuanian officials then placed responsibility for these incidents on Russian military intelligence, stating that it could have resulted in casualties. And the Russians, those savages, have continued their provocations on European territory since then. At the same time, the document emphasizes that there has been a series of incidents involving damage to gas pipelines, cables, and telecommunication lines in the Baltic Sea. Although it was connected to ships arriving from Russian ports, according to intelligence assessments, it was not intentional. At the same time, the report does not specify what data this conclusion was based on. At the same time, we are receiving news that urgent reservist training was announced in Belarus the day before, and therefore there are signals that from the territory of Belarus a military provocation may be carried out. And then suddenly Poland also announces that starting March 10th, it will introduce restrictions on air traffic in the eastern regions of the country bordering Ukraine and Belarus. Well, this is the very area of the Suwałki corridor, which connects the Kaliningrad region of the Russian Federation and Belarus, and which is called the most likely place for a Russian attack, since it is the weakest spot. This is in NATO's defense, and it would cut off the Baltic states from the rest of Europe. And it is reported that the no-fly zone imposed by Poland covers the airspace from ground level up to about 3 kilometers high. This is very important. It means that passenger planes, which fly at much higher altitudes, will continue their flights without any changes. This does not affect them at all. But small aircraft and, very importantly, drones are affected. Piloted aircraft fall under strict regulations. During the nighttime regime, which is from sunset to sunrise, there is a complete ban on flights. The only exceptions are aircraft and certain approved flights by special services. During the daytime regime, which is from sunrise to sunset, flights are allowed only if a flight plan is submitted, a working transponder is present, and constant radio communication with aviation control authorities is maintained. As a result, we can state that the ban applies to small aircraft and drones. But there is no complete closure of the airspace. Well, there isn't, so these reports that Poland has closed its airspace for 3 months are not true. In fact, they only banned small aircraft and drones from flying in that area, which is quite obvious considering what kind of neighbors are nearby. But more importantly, I would still take a close look at that very report from Lithuanian intelligence, which Reuters refers to, and which caused a stir around this news. The statement that Russians are already massing troops at the NATO border is a bit distorted and out of context. The Reuters quote goes like this: Russia is expanding military units on the NATO border, sending them to gain combat experience in Ukraine, and then planning to use them as a hub in a conflict with NATO after the war. Well, that is, it's not about deployment at the current moment. It's about global plans to gain experience in Ukraine for a conflict with NATO, and then to move these troops to the alliance's border. Again, Reuters cites excerpts from the annual report of Lithuanian intelligence. In other words, this isn't some urgent news that intelligence has detected any troop deployment right now. No, once again, it's a general assessment. It's a routine security assessment made by intelligence. In other words, they release such a report every year. It's not like they just detected something and intelligence is urgently reporting it. We just detected it. No. Further in the report it states, quote, if sanctions are lifted, Russia will be ready for a large-scale military conflict with NATO within 6 years. Again, it's not about the current moment, but about a hypothetical scenario 6 years from now. So let's make a note of that. Right now, there is no large-scale troop deployment. But what you should really pay attention to in the report is the quote that Russia wants to increase its army by 30 to 50%. That's true. As for the personnel, that's really the case, and their numbers are increasing quite rapidly. These savage Russian Ivans, they really are ready to go and die. Before the full-scale war, the number of active servicemen in the armed forces of the Russian Federation was 900,000 people. By 2025, there were already 1,134,000 of them. That means in 4 years there were 26% more Russian soldiers, and that's taking into account the truly colossal losses in Ukraine. The day before, Putin also signed a decree setting the size of the armed forces at 1.5 million people. So it really should be noted that Putin set a goal to increase the army by 2/3 compared to its pre-war size. As for military equipment, well, Russia definitely has problems here, and it's possible that Lithuanian intelligence is exaggerating a bit. In general, for now, there is no deployment of Russian troops on NATO's borders. All of Russia's efforts are currently concentrated in Ukraine, but it should also be acknowledged that Europe is still preparing for war with the savage Russians. Well, for example, Finland intends to lift the ban on the import and transit of nuclear weapons that has been in place since the 1980s, as well as on its storage on Finnish territory. This was stated by the country's Minister of Defense, Antti Häkkänen. According to the minister, the current regulations have lost their relevance in the present circumstances and do not correspond to Finland's status as a NATO member. The minister emphasized that the transportation of nuclear munitions will be permitted exclusively for the purpose of national defense. It's funny that the Kremlin has already responded to Finland's plans. For example, the press secretary of the President of the Russian Federation, Dmitry Peskov, stated that the deployment of nuclear weapons on Finnish territory will be regarded as a direct threat to which Moscow will respond with countermeasures. But, I want to remind Peskov and the rest of those unwashed, savage Russians, you were the ones who started this game first. Back when you transferred nuclear weapons to Belarus. So now get used to the fact that every missile in Europe, including nuclear ones, will be aimed at your stupid heads. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. If you found this episode interesting and useful, you can support the work of this YouTube channel financially with your donation or a paid channel membership by using the links and details in the description of this video or the QR code on your screens. I will be grateful for any support you provide. That's all for now. Take care. Goodbye, everyone.